In Namen von dem Bund will ich anerkennen die traditionelle Abhüter von Land, wo wir treffen sich heint, das Wurundjeri-Volk von dem coolen Volk. Und wir geben ab Covid seine Immes und Oves von dem Over, von dem Ossid und Zukünftige. Shalom Aleichem, Zuhörer. Ich begrüße euch wieder im Namen von der Bundorganisation in Melbourne. Ich hoffe, dass ihr seid alle gesund und in der Heim. Wir führen an noch alt mit unseren Podcasten, wo wir reden wegen in Jonem, was haben zu tun mit Yiddish Leben und Kultur. A Pulitzer Prize nomination is an achievement of great significance and a recognition of the quality of one's work. Today's guest was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in music for his album Und alle Tage seien Gewand Purpurn, and All the Days Were Purple. The album was released in April 2019. This work was named a 2020 Pulitzer Prize finalist for music and has variously been described by critics as ravishing, devastatingly beautiful, gorgeous, utterly original and exquisitely unsettling, sweeping, bewitching, divinely dissonant, pitch perfect. Alex Weiser is a New Yorker. He attended Stuyvesant High School and Yale University and received a master's degree in music theory and composition from New York University. He joins us today to talk about his work, his involvement with Yiddish, and his plans for a post-COVID-19 future. Thanks for joining us today, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
On the YIVO website where you work, you are described as a reluctant Hebrew school student. Can I start by asking you about your relationship with Yiddish growing up in New York?
Sure. Well, my relationship to Yiddish as a kid in New York City, I think was a lot like many secular Jews in New York, which is that, I heard a little bit here and there from my parents, from my grandparents, but I didn't speak it. And I really barely had an idea of it as a distinct language, much in contrast to the wonderful, culture that's going on in Australia, where in the Sholem Aleichem College, and you have such a rich community of people still speaking Yiddish and celebrating its culture. For me, it was a kind of, something that was in the background that I wasn't fully aware of. I went to Hebrew school as a kid and I learned Hebrew. And it was only as an adult when I kind of stumbled into working at YIVO, which is a whole other story, that I kind of discovered Yiddish and learned it. And I kind of realized that it was there hiding behind so many things that were very familiar to me and just kind of waiting to be discovered.
So Yiddish wasn't spoken in the home?
No.
And your parents' background, are they born New Yorkers or were they arrivals in America post-Holocaust?
No, my parents were both born in New York. And in fact, most of my grandparents were even born in New York. So my family mostly came to the U.S. in like the 1880s. And so they're very much, here for a long time. So my own, turn to Yiddish is very much like a rediscovery across some generations. I think of it as my grandparents and my parents really being focused on becoming American, and that being something for me that I can really take for granted. And so I have the luxury of kind of, thinking back and rediscovering what was lost when my family became American.
So, Alex, you went to Stuyvesant High School, which is a specialist school for gifted students and exposes them to top people in their chosen field. It's got a specialist music program as well as other areas like science and mathematics. Only 3% of applicants are accepted each year. When did you know that you had both a talent and a passion for music?
Well, when I first went to high school, I wasn't really studying music very seriously yet. I really loved music and I listened to a lot of music growing up. My dad is a big music lover. Um, so I really loved music. And at that point, I played guitar and I kind of like fiddled around with writing a little bit of music, but I wasn't very serious about it yet. And then when I went to Stuyvesant, they have a kind of remedial music appreciation class. And we listened to, Bach and Stravinsky and all sorts of music, which, I really was not previously very familiar with. But I was really an avid listener already, a listener of pop music and of rock music. And that listening kind of, really prepared me. And when I heard all this classical music, I just fell in love with it. And I was like, this is fascinating. I want to learn more. And I kind of went on this journey that, brought me here.
I have a sense, Alex, that you're downplaying something here. Given that Stuyvesant is such a difficult school to get into, it would have taken more than a bit of dabbling with guitar and listening to music at home to get you accepted into Stuyvesant. So, could you tell us a little bit about your musical journey early on that took you into Stuyvesant?
Well, so actually, Stuyvesant, they do have a wonderful music program, but the way that people are accepted into Stuyvesant is just based on a kind of test. And it's like a mathematics test and a text of language. So it's a very tricky test. So I studied really hard for it, and I was very lucky to, get a score that allowed me to join the wonderful school. And I loved Stuyvesant. I had an amazing time there. It's an incredible collection of really hardworking, studious people. So it was a very fun place to go to school.
Fantastic. From Stuyvesant, you went to Yale University and then to New York University, where you were exposed to some wonderful teachers and mentors, as you obviously had been at Stuyvesant as well. What stands out for you about the people that you were both taught by and worked with in your classes?
I had so many amazing experiences with teachers and also with fellow students. And I think when learning to write music, it really is an art, as much as it is a craft. And so I think the most helpful thing that many teachers and also supportive colleagues, bring to the equation is that they help you try to see what you're trying to do and try to give you the tools that will help you do what you're going for. And just to kind of gain clarity about what that is that you're trying to do and also figure out how you can do that better. Because it is such a personal thing.
In the early days, Alex, what were you trying to do? What were you aiming for?
It's something that's very difficult to put into words, which is why, I think music in a way is so special because it's very hard to capture in words. But I try to write music that's very expressive and kind of thoughtful, but that also really demands your attention and gives you something to really think about. And what that is, it's hard to put into words what that is to think about. But I try to create music that is really engaging the listener and kind of giving them something to ask questions about. Why these sounds, why this combination of sounds, what does it mean? And so my music is often dealing with some kind of imagery or references, or I'm kind of like building something with the sound world. I'm getting at something. I'm not just writing a nice melody or something like that.
Alex, your first works were composed in 2008. You would have been quite young at the time. Looking back on it, do you think in any way you were a precocious talent?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, what I can say is that I'm very grateful to have had that experience to write that music, in high school and to work with the orchestra. And just to have the kind of feedback loop of, I wonder what this will sound like. I wonder what this will feel like, to craft a piece that builds in this way, that builds up to this climax, that explores these ideas. So, it was amazing. It was an amazing chance to get to do that at Stuyvesant, to write for the orchestra. Was fantastic. And I think that, it takes a lot of work to write good music, and it takes a lot of practice. And that's something I'm still working on every day. To write better music and to kind of fully actualize these ideas. So I'm just trying to keep looking forward.
I just want to compare for you two songwriters, Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen, who I'm sure you're probably more familiar with than I am. But it took Leonard Cohen years to write Hallelujah. Um, and when in a discussion with Bob Dylan, apparently at one stage they were talking about this, and he asked him about, I think it was Blowing in the Wind, and he said to Dylan, "How long did that take you to write?" He said, "Well, it was 15 minutes in the back of a taxi." Are you a Bob Dylan or a Leonard Cohen type composer?
I labor on my music for a long period of time, but some things kind of come quickly or naturally, or just kind of stumble on something. You're like, oh, I think this is a good idea. So I think for me, it happens both ways, and I'm just happy to take it however it comes.
Alex, you've composed music for piano, violin, voice, trumpet, trombone, bassoon, drums, and probably a range of other instruments as well. What instruments do you play? You mentioned guitar before. And what challenges do you as a composer face in composing music for such different instruments?
Well, so I started on guitar. Um, that was the kind of the first instrument that I really formally studied, and then I started playing the viola so I could play in the high school orchestra. I was a terrible violist, but I really loved playing it because you get to be in the center of the orchestra, really in the middle of all of the action. And I did some conducting, and I also started learning piano. And nowadays, I really mostly just play piano, and mostly just for myself, for the benefit of writing or for fun. I really love playing for fun. Um, and it when writing for instruments, it's actually sometimes best to not use your own skill at that instrument. Some composers, are really writing based on how something feels, which can be a nice approach. But sometimes that also sinks you into a trap of saying, okay, this is an easy thing to play, this is an easy thing to feel, so I'm going to just kind of write that. So in a way, sometimes it's very liberating to write for an instrument that you don't play, and you just kind of study other music written for it, so it sounds certain ways in certain parts of the range, and certain things it can do, certain things it can't do, and then you can allow your imagination to be more free than your kind of muscle memory would lend it if you're playing an instrument that you play well.
Are there any instruments that you find harder or easier to compose for?
I think every instrument has its own set of challenges and its own nuances. Um, it really depends on also what kind of context you're writing for an instrument, because say writing for the harp in the context of an orchestral work isn't necessarily that hard, because you might be using it to have a melody or to accent certain notes or something like that. Whereas writing a solo harp piece is actually incredibly challenging, because then you get into this area where you really need to understand the idiomatic nuances, because you're going to be listening to the harp the whole time, and so the there maybe have to be more activity and more kind of detail, because the harp is in such a case is taking on a larger role of the composition, and so that is a different animal, even the same instrument, writing for solo versus orchestral. But I think basically every instrument has its challenges and has its the virtues of the things that it can really bring to the table. And that's also part of the joy of writing music, is kind of discovering and rediscovering these things. Every time I start writing piece for a different ensemble, I will, get out my favorite albums, and I'll listen to, if I'm writing a piece for string quartet, I'll, listen to all my favorite string quartets, and probably find a bunch more string quartets, take that as an opportunity to expand my ear and my knowledge base, and kind of get different sounds in my ear. So that's always something that is a fun and kind of always new part of writing music for me.
So what kind of music do you listen to when you're not composing, just in your spare time?
I listen to all sorts of music. I mean, it's silly to say, but I really love music a lot. I love contemporary classical music is very close to my heart. That's really kind of the world that I come from, and I have many, many friends that are composers of contemporary classical music, that are performers of contemporary classical music. So a lot of my time is listening to that kind of music. But I'm also a big fan of Golden Age. Broadway has been like a recent fascination of mine. I just read a great book, and also old classical music is also something I really love. Um, and of course, pop music. Like I totally exist in the real world alongside everyone else. I'm not, cloistered away in some kind of classical music castle or something like that. I love all sorts of music, and I'm always happy to listen to something new and to get to know, something. And also, a recent interest of mine has been Yiddish music of all sorts. So my own Yiddish music is really largely, I think, coming from like the classical tradition, rather than specifically a Yiddish tradition. I mean, we could talk about this more in more detail later, but I'm also just very curious about what different kinds of specifically Yiddish music exist, of which there is tons. From folk music to pop music to classical music and more. And that's become a kind of interest of mine to just kind of know that full history, and I'm always learning more.
Was there any Yiddish music in your house growing up? For example, when I was a kid, we had records of Mickey Katz and the Cats and Jammers and other music that was recorded in the 50s and 60s in Yiddish. Was that part of your growing up at all?
Yeah, not really. I mean, like it's kind of there somewhere in the background, and when I listen to that music now, I have that kind of feeling of nostalgia, or that I heard it, that it reminds me of some, past time. But it wasn't a big thing in my own household growing up. Like when I was growing up, my dad was listening to Led Zeppelin and The Who and the Rolling Stones and Elton John. Like that was kind of like his musical world. Um, and he's a big listener, so it was a lot of that.
Does any of his musical influence come into your work, do you think?
It's hard to say exactly, but I think so. I mean, I like to think that my dad would like the music that I write. I mean, obviously, like he can listen to it, and he says he likes it, or whatever. But he's too nice to tell me if he didn't like it. But ever since I was in school, and kind of like my musical education really departed from what he was impressing on me, it's always been a kind of question in the back of my mind. What would my dad think of this? How would I explain this to my dad? As I have gone on various um, journeys into esoteric music, which some of which I really love a lot. And some of which it makes me sad that I can't listen to it with my dad, because he just thinks it's he doesn't enjoy it. And so I mean, I love being able to share um, music with my dad, and I do kind of think that it shapes how I think about music in some way. To think, how could could I explain this to my dad? Could I enjoy this with my dad? Even though um, I think like my kind of concerns as I'm writing, and the kind of things I'm thinking about musically are pretty far removed from that initial kind of musical experience with my dad. But I do think that it's kind of there in the background.
Many of our listeners will be familiar with songs like Frühling, Soll schon kommen die Geule, Jugendhymn and Barrikaden, even if they don't know that it was Shmerke Kaczynski who wrote them. Kaczynski, together with a number of others, including Avram Sutzkever, one of whose poems you set to music in the album that we'll talk about later, they formed a paper brigade and smuggled manuscripts into the Vilna Ghetto to save them from destruction. And after the war, he devoted himself to gathering as much Yiddish music as he could find, with a view to keeping this music legacy alive. In 1954, he was tragically killed in a plane crash in South America. In 2018, you composed a piece called Come Home, with the text taken from Shmerke Kaczynski. Can you tell us a bit about that work?
Well, that's actually, it's an adaptation of Soll shoin Kumen de Geula. That's the particular text, which is a song that I really love. I think it's just a gorgeous song. Um, and one of the things that I'm interested in Jewish culture is ways to think about culture that is particularly Jewish, but also secular. Because I mean, I grew up going to Hebrew school and going to shul for the high holidays and stuff, and kosher style food growing up and those kind of things. Um, but my relationship to Judaism is basically a secular one, and you know, very curious and appreciative of the beauty of the customs and of the traditions, but not a participatory, not participating in ritual Jewish life per se. And so, I'm often curious about ways that the kind of images and these ideas from traditional Jewish life can be reimagined in a more secular context. And that, Zolsho and Kumen de Geula is such a beautiful text of using these kind of traditional Jewish images to as a kind of allegory for something else. And so I thought it would be interesting just to try, to take that text, translate it into English, and kind of take all of the specific things out of it, and kind of make it more abstract. And that was a kind of experiment for that song. And I mean, if I love the Yiddish language, and I think usually when I'm looking at a Yiddish text, I think that the language is the thing that I want to take with me into my musical world. So this piece is a bit different than my norm, I would say, in that I translated and then I adapted it. But that was what I was kind of curious about in this piece.
Alex, in December 2019, you wrote an opera with Ben Kaplan called The State of the Jews, based on the life of Theodor Herzl, and that had some preview performances in New York. And
That's right.
COVID-19 has obviously put a stop to any attempt to stage this opera. Where are things currently at with an attempt to get a premiere for that?
Well, we had these wonderful preview performances, and some great interest from press. Lots of people came. It was really exciting, and we have a very nice kind of recording of those performances to share with opera companies. And basically, we were really in the middle of sharing it with some very interested people right when COVID kind of descended on us, and so there are some folks that are interested, and we're very much hoping that when people go back to planning large scale performances, whenever that is, that we can reanimate these conversations we've been having and find a home for a full production. Because basically, what we did in New York was it was on book, meaning that the singers were holding their sheet music, so as they would in a concert performance, but they had costumes and they acted and we had a set. So it was kind of somewhere between a concert performance where they would just kind of perform the music and a full production where everything would be memorized and they'd be totally in character the whole time. So we kind of got the piece on its feet. We saw what it looks like. We've heard all the music, and we're ready to do a full production.
Alex, 2019 has been a huge year for you. The opera that we just talked about had a few preview performances, and your Pulitzer Prize nominated album, On alle Tage seiner Pulperen, came out in the same year. Now, you're clearly not someone who sits on their hands. At Yale University, you took 150% of course loads in almost every semester that you were there. So, despite that, how did you manage to complete two such major undertakings as your opera and the album at the same time as you're working at YIVO as a director of public programs?
Well, when you put it like that, well, just working nights and weekends. What can I say? The album was in process for a very long time. I'm not very long, but I wrote the piece initially in, I guess, 2017 or something, or premiered in 2017. I probably started it in late 2016. So I had been writing that music for a while, and then we had the first performance of the piece, and then we did the recording, and then we edited the recording, and then we mixed the recording, and then we mastered the recording. So it's quite a long process. So that had been kind of developing and for a long time, and then finally, came out last April or April 2019. And then by the time that I was working on the opera, took about two years to write. So I didn't work on writing them at the same time. So I was kind of writing the opera as we were kind of like, sending mixes back and forth for the album, and kind of going back and forth between different things.
Is it difficult for you to keep a number of projects going simultaneously?
Yeah, it is tricky. I really prefer to work on one thing at once. But mixing and editing and recording is something that's a little bit easier to compartmentalize, I think, than composing new music. So it'd be the kind of thing where, I know that I owe the engineer the next round of comments, so I'll dedicate a few weekends to that, and then, take off from writing and then go back. But definitely it's very hard for me, it's very hard to juggle different things. And when I'm writing a piece, I'm really in the world of that piece. And so I like to just kind of stay there, at least in my composing time.
Alex, the album I'd like to talk about with you now, and Alle Tag Seiniger van Purperen. What was the inspiration for the album? Why choose Yiddish poems to set to music, and how did you select the poems that you were going to use?
So I got this commission from this organization in New York called Roulette, and they're a concert venue, and they support new work. And I got a call from them, and they said, we want to give you this commission, and you can do literally whatever you want. And that's like a pretty unusual thing, because usually, especially in the classical music world, someone will say, I would like you to write a string quartet so that I can play it, on a concert next to this Beethoven piece, or I want you to write a piano trio that, will be used, tell it for a ballet telling this story, or something like that. So to have someone call you up and say, I'd like you to just do whatever you want, is an amazing gift. And so I took that as an opportunity to really think about, well, what do I want to do? What would be really special for me right now? What would help me kind of collect my artistic thoughts and my compositional thoughts? And it was at that time that I just kind of started learning Yiddish and discovering this whole literary world of Yiddish. And I thought this would be an amazing opportunity to set some of these poems to music. And so I took that as an excuse to do tons of reading and looking around for poems that really spoke to me and that really kind of captured the intellectual ideas that I'm interested in and the artistic ideas that I'm interested in. And I stumbled on, this group of poems, which are, I think of them as like almost prayerful, and I think this gets back to what I was saying earlier about, finding ways to think about Jewishness and being Jewish in the world in a way that's secular. And these poems are all kind of, dealing with the divine, dealing with life and death and meaning, but they are secular poems. And so, it was an interesting way into thinking about Jewish meaning making in a secular context.
Alex, if we look at the recent depictions of Yiddish, particularly on TV shows like Shtisel and Unorthodox, it's shown as a language of the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox Jews.
Right.
What's the state of Yiddish amongst young Jews now in America, and perhaps specifically in New York?
Well, I think that there are a lot of different Yiddishes in New York right now, and people interested in Yiddish, which I think is like a wonderful thing. There are people who speak Yiddish because it's their first language, either in the Haredi community. There's also a community of Yiddishists in New York who teach their children Yiddish, and they teach it to stay connected to the past and to be a part of tradition. There are people that are interested in Yiddish as a way of reconnecting or reclaiming certain, parts of Jewish history. And I think that, for me, Yiddish is a way it is a way to connect with history, and it's a way to connect with, to think about Jewishness and Jewish identity in a different way, or in a way with something added to it, which is, the whole rich cultural world that the Yiddish language unlocks.
Alex, how important is the Pulitzer Prize nomination for you and for Yiddish?
Well, it's a great honor, and I really hope that it will, shine a light on this piece and help it get out there more, which I think it already has, and so that's really exciting. And it is, it's an amazing honor that I think that this is the first Pulitzer related, uh, nomination or anything for something to do with Yiddish. At least, certainly in the music category, it is, and that's exciting. And I think it's a part of the a part of the growing meaning that Yiddish is having for people that are re-examining Jewishness and Jewish history and Jewish culture and what that means now. And I do think that Yiddish is having, something of a renaissance in the artistic world, where you have people that are like me, that are, third generation, fourth generation, that are looking back and trying to reconnect and re-examine their Jewish past, and try to find new meaning in it, or more meaning, or different meaning. And Yiddish can play a tremendous role in that. So I do think that a lot of people are turning to Yiddish, and hopefully this will help spread the good word of that.
You're probably aware that Fiddler on the Roof, Fiddler auf dem Dach, was scheduled to come to Australia in
Yeah,
September of this year, and I went along to a meeting where it was being discussed, and Joel Grey joined by video for that, and the excitement in the room was just amazing. Well,
yeah.
COVID-19 sort of put a stop to that, but we're still optimistic that at some point in the future that will be able to go ahead, just like your opera, State of the Jews. You spoke earlier on about stumbling onto YIVO at some point. Could you tell us about how you stumbled onto YIVO and the work that you're doing there as a Director of Public Programs, and what you're hoping to achieve in that role?
Sure. So I guess I've been at YIVO more than 4 years now. And when I first came to YIVO reached out to me, and I had been working at a music festival called the Mata Festival. It's a festival of contemporary classical music, and I was helping to run the festival, which has concerts, but also educational activities and different kinds of outreach. And so I think when YIVO reached out to me, they were kind of wanting, someone with the administrative experience, but a little bit of an outside perspective, outside of the Jewish studies world, outside of the Yiddish world, because they're very keen to bring all the riches and treasures of the YIVO cultural world to people outside of it, not just to have a conversation with people who already appreciate those things. And so that was, how they reached out to me. And I came to YIVO, and I was kind of, dumbstruck by how amazing of a place it was. YIVO is, just a few blocks from where I grew up. And, the idea that there's this amazing treasure trove and, rich cultural world that I didn't really know that much about in general, and in terms of specifically YIVO, really didn't know about at all, really just blew me away. And so I was very excited to start working at YIVO. And as soon as I started working at YIVO, I was attending every single event, because that's my job, is to organize the events and produce them and everything. So I attended every event, and also started taking Yiddish classes, because they said, "Oh, we have these Yiddish classes, and if you want to take them, feel free." So I said, "Oh, this will be interesting, sure." And I, just kind of went down this path, and I think if they wanted, I've become an insider, through being at YIVO for 4 years, through learning Yiddish, and through, and it's been an utter joy to do that for me. And so at YIVO, I produce all the public programs, and we do lectures, conversation panels, academic conferences. We do a lot of concerts also, which is part of the reason that I was also brought on. So I curate concerts of Jewish music from things that are in YIVO's archives, which is a really fun thing for me. And we even do theatrical performances sometimes. Most of our events are in English, but we do have some Yiddish language programming as well. And, overall, we're just trying to, create a platform for engaging critically with Jewish history and with Jewish culture, and for celebrating Jewish history and Jewish culture, and for bringing it to both, the academic community and the already YIVO community, but also the wider world, Jewish and non-Jewish. And so we try to think about how we can, create events that bring those treasures of YIVO to everyone else, and kind of open up a door so that people can come in and enjoy.
Alex, we're all starting to think about a post-COVID-19 future. What does that look like for you? What projects have you got? Clearly, the state of the Jews, getting that staged is a priority for you. What else is kind of running around in your head? What else are you hoping for, planning for, thinking about?
Yeah. Well, I'm working on a ballet right now, or a piece for dance, for the Puglisi Dance Theater, and I was actually supposed to premiere, within a week or two from now, but it looks like that won't be happening. So we've been actually workshopping it on Zoom, which has been a really different experience. So I'm chipping away at this dance piece, which is very different from an opera or from a Yiddish album, and so I'm working on that right now. I'm also writing an orchestral version of And All the Days Were Purple. So that's something I'm really looking forward to, really kind of crossing my fingers that it's not canceled. It's supposed to happen in October. Or if it is has to, be canceled, that it's postponed. So we'll see what happens with that. But that's on my agenda. And beyond that, I wanna write more songs. Doing lots of reading and thinking about what a next big song cycle would look like. And I have a few different ideas. And I also want to write more operas. I love writing vocal music. I love writing a lot of different kinds of music, but I've found myself writing a lot of vocal music the last few years, and I find that is very satisfying. And I think it goes back to that kind of musical background we were talking about before, of that, songs are even very, heady, abstract songs. Songs are a real, avenue for connection, and it's a lovely medium. So I want to keep writing songs.
So Alex, hopefully you can write an opera in Yiddish that will make its way to Australia. You will be able to come here for the premiere of that opera, and we'll be able to meet in person. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you for joining us today and for sharing with us your musical journey, your involvement and introduction to the Yiddish-speaking community, and I hope you are richer for that. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to listening to more of your music in the future, and perhaps, as I say, hosting you in Australia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
My name is Allan Preiss. Thank you for joining us today in another Bund podcast, where we spoke with Alex Weiser from New York about his musical work, his Pulitzer Prize nominated album On Alle Tage sind gewesen Purpurn, And All the Days Were Purple, and his work at YIVO. Today's podcast, like the others in our series, was produced by Gideon Price, who also played our Willkommen On theme music. Bis wir treffen sich weiter, bleibt gesund und stark.